gracias por asistir a este encuentro, que es el cuarto encuentro, en verdad, que se celebra en TEA, comisariado por Roc Laseca, como ustedes saben, comisario que habitualmente, en fin, preocupado por cuestiones vinculadas con los centros de arte, con los museos, pues ha traído a esta casa y también al Museo de la Naturaleza y el Hombre, que está embarcado, como nosotros, en esta historia. Como digo, ha traído nombres de primera línea internacional, Joseph Kosu, tuvimos también a Kunelis, y gestores de centros de arte, como fue Sotomayor de la Fundación de Cisneros. Hoy tenemos a Chris Dercon, que es, como ustedes saben, director de la TATE Modern en Londres desde 2011, un centro que está unido al destino de esta casa, de TEA Tenerife Espacio de las Artes, de alguna manera por el propio, la propia firma de los arquitectos que rehabilitaron aquel espacio. Saben ustedes que la TATE Modern está construida sobre la antigua sede de una central eléctrica que cesó, creo que en el año 81, la Bankside, y bueno, a partir de ahí estos arquitectos suizos, Herzog y Demurand, realizaron una labor interesantísima de rehabilitación. Es un modelo el centro para Europa, un modelo, digo, de dinamización no solamente del arte contemporáneo, sino también de un lugar, de una ciudad, de un determinado concepto museístico, ¿no? Bueno, también, por supuesto, habría que añadir que no solamente por esa cuestión de firma arquitectónica está unido el destino de TEA y de la TATE Modern. Podemos pensar en sus colecciones. Me imagino que hablarán Roc y Chris sobre esta cuestión también a continuación. En las colecciones el museo dedica un espacio importante al surrealismo internacional, al igual que en esta casa, que en TEA Tenerife Espacio de las Artes, que saben ustedes que su colección fundacional se origina en relación a la obra de Oscar Domínguez. Y, por supuesto, debemos nombrar, como no, aquella exposición tan importante que hubo en Londres en el año 36, con la publicación de aquel manifiesto, aquel boletín internacional de surrealismo, ¿no? Una exposición que retoma dentro de esta publicación del boletín la exposición que hubo aquí en Tenerife en el año 35, ¿no? Esos boletines que quedan para la historia del arte y del surrealismo como un acontecimiento, un hito de mucho interés de aquella internalización del movimiento, ¿no? Un primero publicado en Praga, el segundo en Tenerife, el tercero en Bélgica y el cuarto ya en el 36 en Londres, ¿no? De tal manera que hay unas conexiones ahí de mucho interés, muy interesantes, que debíamos señalar. Gracias por asistir. Estos encuentros no solo acaban aquí, saben ustedes que hay luego también algún tipo de debates, de encuentro con gestores culturales, con artistas en estos días, y un taller en el Museo de Naturaleza y el Hombre este viernes. Así que, como digo, es un plan que nos ha preparado Roc Laseca, sin duda ineludible y de mucho interés. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Welcome everybody, of course. I want to thank the support of Gobierno de Canarias, Cabildo de Tenerife, and Universidad de La Laguna, who, as you know, are the three main supporters of this independent program, Los Encuentros Denkbilder. I have to acknowledge very personally and very publicly the invitation, the acceptance of the invitation of Chris Dercon, who has been very kind at accepting this, taking part in the 4th edition of this program. So thank you very much, Chris, for being here with us. As a little bit was introduced by Isidro, Los Encuentros Denkbilder were born a couple of years ago. This is the 4th edition, so 4 editions ago, as the result of an activation of a program that makes us capable to think, to make conversations, to make workshops, and to activate a certain vocabulary with the support of external interlocutors, external visitors, that makes us capable to think and to think about ourselves, about our possibilities here in the island. So, as he probably said, we had the first edition with Yanis Kunelis, We continued with Jesus Mayor from CIFO Foundation, and last winter we counted on Joseph Courses. So this is also an important time in which we count on the presence of Chris Dercon, whose conversation are going to also help us to open a public discussion. Of course, we're very welcome to participate at any point of this conversation, to interrupt us and be part of this conversation. I like to define Los Encuentros Denkbilder as a sort of radical reversal of that description that Brian O'Doherty used to say about the white cubes. He said the white cubes are those places where you had everything to see, but you could not talk, you could not meet, you could not drink, you could not sleep. So somehow reversing this traditional model of the white cube, here we invite many curators and many artists, but there is nothing to be seen. We're only here to talk, to meet, to drink, and to sleep. So this is extremely important for us at a time when, from my perspective, we are trying to refound the possibilities of our institutions, the possibilities of our public places, public art centers, and the different relationships that our local communities and external communities can engage with our centers. So I think that we're going to start with this conversation, Chris. Why don't you drive us a little bit through the experience of this time transforming the extension of TATE, but not only the extension, so it's not only in terms of cultural infrastructure, but in terms of strategy, in terms of the new philosophy that TATE is developing and opening in 2016.
How much time do we have? Because you said that we can talk, sleep, whatever. Okay. First of all, I have to apologize because I don't speak Spanish. And I'm Belgium, and we were occupied by your nation many, many years. So normally I should speak Spanish, and also I should speak your language, because what I heard from our consul tonight, Nille Hellemond, that Palma, the little island across here, was in the beginning called the Flemish nation. And so in a way, I mean, Spanish should be my second language. Also because, of course, the Belgians had the first tourist attraction here, the Ten Bell, the Tenerife, Belgium. Maybe that's a reason not to speak Spanish. Where should I start? First of all, I'm really happy to be here, not only as a Belgian. I'm happy to be here because this morning we visited with Roc and Fernando Meniz. We visited the Tanque, and the Tanque is, of course, very important for TATE Modern. Because TATE Modern, the expansion, which is going to open in June 2016, the expansion started really with the opening of the tanks of TATE Modern. And I'm sure that Jacques Herzog, who has a house, as you know, in El Puriz, and who loves not only the Canarian Islands, and not only Tenerife, but especially Santa Cruz, that Jacques Herzog must have seen in 1996 the Tanque, the idea, the vision of Fernando Meniz here, because otherwise I cannot explain why Jacques Herzog was so incredibly indulgent and so incredibly convinced that he wanted also to make a tank as a cultural infrastructure in London at TATE Modern. I can imagine that it's also because, you know, it's easier to go from Tenerife to London and from London to Tenerife than it is to go from London to Liverpool. I mean, it's more expensive to go from London to Liverpool, and it takes much longer than to come to Tenerife. So in a way, we have these two tanks, the tank of Fernando Meniz and the tank of Jacques Herzog. So for me, it's quite exceptional to be here, especially because I think that here with the TEA, that here is a museum been realized, opened in 2008, 12 years after the tanks, which is another form of pioneering cultural infrastructure. Because when Roc took me this afternoon coming from the Hotel Mense to the Plaza de España, I was thinking to myself, this is not a museum. This is much more. This is a public square. This is a form of urbanism. This is a kind of crossroad. It is a library, of course, and especially it's a meeting place. And I was shocked in a positive way to come and to see that the library is not overbooked, but the library is alive. And also the fact that there are so many people here tonight to come and listen to Roc and myself means that this place is a meeting place. The Museum of the Future is a museum of encounters. And so 1996, the tank as a futuristic cultural infrastructure. 2008, the opening of the TEA. So you could say that Santa Cruz has two kind of nuclei of examples where we are heading for when we think about cultural infrastructure. And that's something which I'm especially interested in. And I'm especially interested in that. Marco, can we have some of the images here of the PowerPoint? Oh, you're here. No, Marco is the guy over there. He's my buddy. So, interestingly enough, when we start to talk about museums, we don't talk about museums as places for encounters yet enough. What we talk about is about museums as big buildings. And so many, many years ago, do we have an image here? No, we don't. Many, many years ago, a famous art magazine called Art News, it did work. Everything was perfect. Everything was perfect. So let me tell some other homages to Santa Cruz. I mean, it did work. The technique doesn't like us. Okay, we do it differently. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. Okay. So many years ago, we talked about museums as these incredible growing big buildings, and it was still the time of the big museum boom. And every mayor in every country wanted to have his own Bilbao. The Guggenheim was called My Bilbao. I remember speaking to the mayor of Staten Island, which is this little island off New York, and the mayor there, he said, I want to have my Bilbao, which means I want to have my big museum. So the museum was associated with buildings, ever-growing big buildings. And Art News published this cover many years ago. But guess what? A couple of months ago, The Economist was publishing something about museums, and The Economist didn't discuss anymore the fact that museums are growing and growing and growing. No, The Economist was talking about something else. Not expansion in terms of stone, but expansion in terms of what is public space. The museum is a temple of delight. And that was incredibly important for us, because the drama and the success of TATE Modern happened overnight in 2003, when the Icelandic-Danish artist Oliver Eliasson presented the Weather Project. And because London is not Palma, is not Santa Cruz, is not Tenerife, we don't have sun, he created a sun and a beach in the turbine hall, and it was called the Weather Project. You may also call the Tenerife Project. What happened, just like in Tenerife, you could say, and I really mean it, what happened is that the public got out of control. We could not tell the public anymore what to do. They took over the turbine hall. They stayed 24 hours. They did picnics. They had their kids hanging around. They were using the space just for themselves. And we considered the turbine hall always as a meeting place, as a place for encounters, but we had never, ever imagined that the turbine hall was becoming a place where the public took the program in their own hands. And that's something which I'm incredibly interested in, because the problem in 2003 is now the solution. The public is not a problem anymore. The public is incredibly important, and I'm not talking about millions of people. I think what I'm seeing happening here is that the TEA is becoming, instead of the museum as a hard meeting place, it's becoming a soft meeting place. It is a public square, it is a place for encounters, it's even an agora, it's even a mercado, it is a library, and of course it's also making exhibitions, very important. The exhibition of Oscar Dominguez is incredibly important. But the museum is much more than just showing objects on a wall. And the museum is also ready to be taken over by the public, and the public can do whatever they want with a museum, and that's incredibly important. And I see that slowly happening in many, many places in the world, that suddenly the curators, the directors, the managers of the museums and the politicians, they start to consider museums quite differently. And that's the reason why I'm here, because here you have two very important steps in terms of considering the museum very differently, which is the tanque, where you can do everything. It's a dark space. It has a reverberation of 15, but also you can play classical music in it. You can use it for pop concerts. You can use it for parties. And it's in the middle of the city. It's an industrial plant. And you have the museum, the TEA here, which is a public square, and many things at the same time. Yet, we have a big problem. And the big problem is that most politicians and most tour operators, they are not convinced yet, they don't know yet, that this kind of tools are incredibly important social, economical tools for the future. They are incredibly social, economical tools for the future, because we all know what tourism is. We know Tenerife, Tendel, and all the beaches. It's mass tourism, it's charter tourism. And we know that the tourists barely come out of the hotels. We also know, when we think about the north of Tenerife, when we think about the Vulcano El Teide, which is one of the greatest natural parks, not only of Spain, but also of Europe, that ecological, natural or nature tourism is also important. We also know that it's a small step to go from ecological nature tourism to cultural tourism. But it's an incredible big step still, and it's a step which we have to do to go to knowledge tourism. And knowledge tourism is a social economical factor of the future. And what do I mean with knowledge tourism? I exactly know what is going on here. What I'm going through when I see in Santa Cruz, when I see the connections between commerce, the mercado, when I see the connections between the universities, when I see the connection between the library and the life in the street and the shopping street, suddenly this is becoming almost like a knowledge center. And in London, one of the most exciting developments, besides TATE Modern, which is an agora, which is a university, a people's university, people come and do whatever they want. One of the most exciting developments is St. Pancras and King's Cross. The connection between the newspaper The Guardian, who created a kind of membership hub where readers can come and go and meet. The connection between the station, St. Pancras, King's Cross and The Guardian, but also the British Library and the British Museum, and new residential and recreational areas. And you have it already. It's here. London is still waiting for it to become. And London is spending a lot of money in the KQ, the Knowledge Quarter, which is the King's Cross Quarter. They spend a lot of money on Bankside, and now they're going to spend a lot on Battersea Park, and you have it already. So somebody here on this island has to be convinced that this place is unique. It's one of the unique things in Europe, yet we barely spend any money on it to keep it going and to create programs. And I was very surprised to hear how little money there is and what a great infrastructure there is. And I do think that we should invest in these type of museums in order to invest in a kind of social economical future, which is based on tourism. I'm not saying that tourism is bad, not at all. We have to take tourism even more serious. And that's the reason why we have to take this cultural infrastructure serious, to think it forward. And that's exactly the same thing we are doing now with TATE Modern. TATE Modern is a place trying to create a museum for the future, which is speaking about a new form of social economical order. And that's what I'm interested in. Voilà.
No, I think that we are in an extraordinary time, Chris, about what you're saying, at least here in the island, where we are not taking all this that you're saying for granted anymore. At least we're trying to put this on the table, to put it under discussion, and to see which are the strategies that we can build up in order to know which is going to be our position, our local position, but also our international position in terms of creating programs, exhibitions, and also dealing with our communities here at the different institutions that we are having. But you have mentioned before that now museums, we are definitely considering museums as these encounter points, these meeting places, these somehow arenas, forums, public plazas. Do you think that sometimes the more metaphors we have to define a museum, the less we really know what it can really be? I mean, as a hybrid institution, a museum is at the same time an open house, experimental theater. It is also a tourist destination, but at the same time, it is also an expanded academy. So sometimes these hybrid institutions do not only need new infrastructures, but basically, as you say, new programs, new ways of doing things, new ways of approaching exhibitions, research, mediation.
Mm-hmm. What we don't want is what I'm showing here. We don't want another museum which has a caviar silo and a helipad and a billionaire suit and a travel depository. This is a caricature about the extension of museums in the United States and in Great Britain and everywhere. That's what we do not want. But what we do want and what we do know is this. When we asked our public their main motivations for visiting, they said that they are still coming for inspiration, they are still coming for aesthetic experience, they are still coming to gain knowledge, but most of the people come to TATE Modern and come to museums these days to spend time with others, 45%. So that at least something we know. Then the second thing we know is that in the museum we pose questions which even Google can't answer. For instance, a question which Google cannot answer is the following. Why did I hate the erotical work of Oscar Dominguez 4 years ago? And why do I like his erotical work right now? When you ask Google to answer that question, Google is not going to tell you the right answer. Another question, and by the way, these questions about Oscar Dominguez, how we relate to his work, that's the kind of questions we ask. Another question which the museum can ask but Google cannot answer is the following. Is the Abuela Josefa, is she a public good or is she a common good? We all know the difference between private goods and public goods. We know all that the Hotel El Mense is private and TEA is public. That we know. But do we know the difference between public goods and common goods? Public goods are goods which are in public, but they need management and a form of a social mandate. Common goods are forms of mutuality, are forms of cooperation and collaboration. So, Josefa, the Abuela, who has now 75,000 people saying she has to be liberated, is suddenly becoming a common good for I'm not defending that, I'm just saying that's the difference. And TEA has all the ingredients in its hand to become, from a public good, a common good, because of the way it's created as an infrastructure. And these kind of questions we ask with museums. Another thing we can ask with museums is, for instance, why do I put an object between two other objects? Why do we do that? And we call it curating. And we know that everybody in the world, the Zaras, the Intex, the H&Ms, all the big chains in the world, they have problems with selecting, choosing, with curating. Because there is so much stuff, and we have to tell our consumers that this works with other stuff. In museums, we are trained to see and to do things where we put an object and we create a relationship, a completely subjective relationship with two other objects. So we do things in museums which Google cannot answer. And we can do the same kind of things here, because, for instance, we can speculate on history. One of the fascinating things, and I spoke earlier about Palma, that it was called the Flemish nation because Palma was one of the most incredible trading points for Belgium. But another history, of course, is that Tenerife, Santa Cruz, was a very important port for the Belgians going to colonize the Congo. So there is a history of Antwerp, Tenerife, and Congo. There are many other histories which a museum can tell. For instance, when I would build a collection here with this museum, it is a collection about these shared histories. And these shared histories, they are, of course, for Tenerife, much more important than the Belgium connection. It's the Latin American connection. Wouldn't it be fantastic to think about bridging Latin American avant-garde modernism and what's happening today with what's happening in Europe via Tenerife? How do you do that? Well, then somebody here has to negotiate with Reina Sofia and with Magba, who have major Latin American collections, and saying, we are going to build here exhibitions, and we're going to build a collection which is treating exactly that, which is Tenerife, Venezuela, Tenerife, Cuba, all this back and forth, this ping-pong. And we can create and ask these kind of questions. But another question which is much more contemporary is, of course, to create exhibitions asking what is tourism and what does tourism do to us. There are many exhibitions to be made about all these kind of subjects, past, present, and future. And we can do that by asking the questions which Google can answer, because we are allowed to ask these questions. I'm absolutely sure that there are also exhibitions and activities to be made where you can relate to tourism. How to do that is a question of a political will, whereby politicians, they say, I mean, if Fernando Clavillo, if he really is serious, announcing in July, which was even in The Guardian, that he wants the tourists to leave the hotel and to spend more time in the cities. If he's really serious, then he has to take this area incredibly serious, this KQ, this knowledge quarter, with what's happening here, and invest money in what's going on here. I think you have so many ingredients. I explained histories which are true, which have happened. I explained the example of tourism, but of course there is also the example of the films which have been made on Tenerife, inspired by Tenerife. I mean, the fact that there is a film now selected for the Toronto Film Festival called Evolution reflects again, like one of the newspapers was telling today, that this island is an island full of cinema images, which go back as far as Douglas Sirk, which also relate to German cinema, Werner Herzog, which also relate to Hollywood cinema, like Ridley Scott. So there are all these histories to be told. And when our friend He spoke about the importance of imagination and collection. And you mentioned Oscar Dominguez. I'm always saying that collecting and collection is not just a matter of assembling hard objects, but it's also a matter of assembling stories and try to mix these stories around. And here on this island, you can tell many stories, and not in the least stories about art and science, stories about art and ecology, stories about art and nature, stories about art and food, stories about art and music. So what you need is a cook who puts this all together, but the cook needs these ingredients, and he needs to go onto the market to buy these, and therefore you need some money. But if the cook doesn't have the money to buy these ingredients, then you can have a beautiful building, and you have this concept and goodwills, but nothing is going to happen. So I'm shocked. Shocked in a positive way and a negative way. Positive way because the cultural infrastructure is there, but where is the political will to invest in this and to make sure that the tourists are going to come here? Well, that's maybe a question Google cannot answer.
Thank you, Chris. But let's talk a little bit about this way in which we as collective or as individuals are now trying to engage with images. As you just mentioned, you have a special interest in revisiting the role of the audiences, and perhaps this is one of the key ingredients of the transformation period now at TATE, but I think this is crucial also everywhere. I think that we have experienced a radical transformation since the 18th century and 19th century, when we had very little objects of aesthetics, very little artworks, and a lot of public visitors and consumers of those objects. So we had a lot of subjects of aesthetics. But now that we are all immersed in the process and consumption, even in the production of images, I think that we are trying to know how audiences are taking part in our museums and are being engaged far from the way in which we traditionally call it participatory, or I know that you like mentioning the audiences as contributors, people who really help us to construct the notion of the institutionality. So how can we really translate all this new vision of the engagement of the publics and the audiences within the museums with specific programs, with specific initiatives?
Well, I can give an example of a possible cultural project which interests me, which is the following. We know all the tradition of the grotesque, which started in the 15th, 16th century, which are all these grimaces and very strange faces which we see in the history of art. And the history of the grotesque is, of course, taken on from the 15th, 16th century. Think of Hieronymus Bosch or Bruegel or other artists, is taken on further by the Romantics, and today find this expression in what tourists do, and not only tourists. I mean, it's shocking when you go to the beaches and everywhere you see all these people with selfies and their sticks. And I'm not shocked by selfies and the sticks. I'm fascinated, and again shocked in a positive way, that the people cannot look normal anymore. They take all these clowns. And sometimes I think they imitate Beyoncé because she's also doing like this, and she puts herself forward, or they imitate Kanye West because he's doing like this. But everybody is playing and acting out as a clown. And it's so interesting that people cannot look normal anymore. I'm just looking at you. You're not yet selfies addicts because you still look normal. But if you look at people's faces today, it's like, everybody is doing this kind of grotesque. And you can laugh at this, but you shouldn't. Because the Kanye Wests and the Beyoncés and all the teenage girls on the beaches and the tourists with the selfie sticks, the only thing they express is that we all want to achieve an ideal and a better life. But we realize we cannot. And so the best thing is to laugh at ourselves and our friends, and to be a clown, and to make a clown of yourself. And this is not new. The selfie stick and the selfies and the fact that we are all these sad, incredibly sad clowns, very unglamorous, very unelegant, is going back as far as the 15th, 16th century. Because somewhere we recognize that we cannot achieve this ideal life. So, there are exhibitions to be made with tools from today which go as back far as the 15th, 16th century, which we all understand. And I call that the tourism of the image. It's visiting and bringing images all over and mixing them and trying to look back and forth. Because what's very interesting is that cultural goods, as it says here, are exceptional because of the conversations that make them cultural. And that's very important. When you create these kind of programs, you have to make sure you have these conversations which are incredibly important. And cultural participation then is incredibly important, because cultural participation is important for innovation, welfare, sustainability, social cohesion, new entrepreneurship, soft power, local identity, knowledge economy. And this is not coming from me. This is an analysis from economists working also for the European community. And the strange thing, or the funny thing is that those countries where cultural participation was the highest, in those countries, the population was more happy than in countries where cultural participation was incredibly low. So it's absolutely incredibly crucial now to invest in cultural participation, and I said this in the beginning, as a social economical tool. In order to create conversations and in order to program things which are part of that new social economical order, we can go in many, many different directions. We can grab from history, we can grab from the present, we can go as far as the future, and we can deal with many different subjects. What we have to realize, though, is that today, visual culture is becoming a sponge, and it's soaking up all these kind of disciplines without giving anything back. We have to be incredibly careful that we do not become pseudo-sociologists, pseudo-urbanists, pseudo-designers, pseudo-whatever. That's incredibly important.
And do you think that in this sense, a museum, and I'm thinking in museums ground-rooted, museums located in small places, can also have an extensive duties beyond culture, beyond being cultural producers. I mean, while the museum is usually immersed in the production of allegorical and discursive conversations and processes, I think that many times we forget that the museum has an empirical impact upon society. I mean, it presents a sort of what I like to call even an orthopedical service in the complex city, in the complex urbanism where it is. So many times I wonder if apart from being extremely symbolic and speculative in terms of narrations and the possibilities that a museum can host within its walls, I think that local-based museums could also, I don't know if you agree with me, serve as a sort of operative machines, even to help to support other private and government agencies to solve and to deal with technical, strategical things. For instance, what are we going to do with our reorganization of the territory? Things that are happening here in the island. Or how are we going to deal with our tourism, not only in terms of cultural consumers or users, but even thinking as tourism as it is, as a flux of people, of 12 million people coming here to the islands. Or how can we solve drought in our fields, no? Or how are we dealing...
How can we solve the problem of Abuela Josefa?
Abuela Josefa.
Because if you don't watch out, she's going to start a political party. I mean, it's like...
You know, she's going to be finally released on Friday, so happily. No, but I mean, there are some technical and empirical things that sometimes a museum can even support, not only by providing speculative reflection, which is extremely important for us to know, because at the end of the day, in a museum, we are learning to live and die together.
Did you see this image? In the turbine hall, we did the weather project of Oliver Eliasson, where all these people gathered, and they did the things they wanted to do. And the curators were incredibly upset, and even the artists in the beginning, because the masses of people, we had about 1 million, they used the space, whatever, as they wish. But we had other activities like Doris Salcedo, Argentinian artist, who created this big breaking line in the turbine hall, and it was used for protests. And this protest you see here, it was used by protesters, citizens who wanted to defend this idea of minimum wage, because you know that London is an impossible city. I mean, it's too expensive to live, and the minimum wage is very, very low, too low in order to live in London. Now, the whole point what I want to make is that suddenly, and it's something which is not easy to deal with, suddenly the turbine hall is becoming one of the main locations for protest in London. Not only against TATE and BP and oil, but for every kind of single idea, people are starting to use it as a protest place. And why do they use it as a protest place? Because, of course, protest is something which is very normal in art. This is a protest by Tania Bruguera, who is a Cuban artist, who is now released. She was arrested for 8 months in Cuba. And Tania Bruguera, she asked horse policemen, to come to TATE and to regulate the masses of people attending TATE exhibitions on a weekend. And of course, people were incredibly scared that these horse policemen came into the turbine hall. And this was just to say, how do demonstrations and machines of control work? But another thing which we now are confronted with is that a lot of people, they use the turbine hall to paint protest signs. Because first of all, we have a very flat floor, and you can do whatever thing you want, and it's not raining. So before a demonstration, people come and paint signs. And they are inspired by good signs, because in order to create a protest, you have to have style. It's incredibly important the way you're dressed, what you chant, and what you show. It's incredibly, style is very important for the success of a protest, I tell you. And so the reason the point I'm making, is art taking on a more political agenda, or is politics becoming more like art? Because when we look at Occupy St. Paul's, I was walking around with artists and they were saying, hey, that's just how my installation looks like. And we saw somebody sitting in front of the tent like the thinker of Dürer and the thinker of Rodin. So in a way, it's very, in our society of today, it's incredibly difficult to find out what is what. If I'm walking in London and I see some beautiful girls with guys dressed in leather and whatever, I think, wow, this is a fashion shoot model. No, it's not. It's a drug bust. When I see people protesting, I think, wow, this is a protest. No, it's not. It's an advertisement shoot for YouTube. I mean, do we still know what is? I mean, and that's incredibly important, I think, that we also start to figure out that the museum can take, or what we do in museums, that it can take many, many different appearances. Oh, here, see, I told you, I mean, see? This is an image of a couple of weeks ago. It's used as a form of protest, and it works, I mean, we do it also. Release Ai Weiwei was on top of our building. I'm not saying that you have to start using TEA as a protest square, but it would be very interesting to think about what this square can do and what this means. And so I think the idea of the museum is up for grasp. The museum is becoming a space for exchange between generations, economical exchange, cultures, disciplines. I mean, exchange is absolutely crucial today. And I think what you have here in the TEA is a space for exchange. And we are now creating with TATE Modern, we are creating more and more social spaces, because we know that, as I showed you the statistics, that people want to use it as a space for encounters. And maybe, Roc, this is a good time, Marco, to show a little video where you see my boss, Sir Nick Serota, together with the architects, Jacques Herzog and Pierre Demeron, explaining the problem of the success of TATE and why it was necessary to reinvent the museum. Marco, can we show DVD number 1? Thank you very much. See, we rehearsed this completely. We worked the whole week on it.
Well, when we built TATE Modern, we had the expectation that we'd get between 2 and 2.5 million visitors a year. The old TATE had about 2 million. The National Gallery gets 4, the British Museum gets 5. So we thought 2.5 would be about right. The first year we had 5. Anyone who comes here at the weekend has to be aware that the building is overcrowded. You can't have the kind of experience that everyone would like to have.
It's fantastic for us to do this because it's a building which adds something to a very successful new museum. The completion project gives us the opportunity to connect. The building should make that even more success with the people, to be even more really part of London.
Those spaces will again generate spaces unlike any other museum in the world. So we can give artists the chance to play the turbine hall instrument or play the oil tanks instrument in a way that no one else can. And it's one of the things that makes TATE Modern unique, and it's one of the things that makes TATE Modern, I think, the success that it has been.
Can we now, Marco, can we show DVD 2? Thank you very much.
21,500 square meters. 65 meters of new building space. 11 levels. The TATE Modern project is the expression of a museum on the move. And it's the expression of a museum which is in constant transformation. It's not just recording things, objects and events, it's also producing. In order to produce new ideas, you need to create a museum which is not just there for objects, but also for people. And that's what the TATE Modern project is going to be. A performative space. A machine for viewing. Streams of activities, new technologies. Level 1, oil tanks. It's the basis.
It's not a gallery space, it's not a public piazza, not a theatre, it's somewhere that's a hybrid of all three.
Their space and their volume allows for this extraordinary flow and intermeshing of different kinds of activities, both historic and contemporary practice.
The moment you walk into these spaces, you'll know that it's something very different, very active and very much alive.
We want to test the walls of the museum, shifting a focus away from looking at an object and thinking about art as a conversation between the viewer and the artwork.
Level 2 will be an urban plaza. Level 3, Level 4, Level 5, new spaces for exhibitions. We are going to be able to show 2 times as much of our collection. Level 6, Level 7, education, exchange. Level 8, Level 9, Level 10, lots of social space, a fabulous restaurant. Level 11, an uninterrupted view, 360 degrees of the whole of London.
Okay, so what I wanted to show is that Santa Cruz has already many of these levels realized. You have a tank, you have an urban plaza, you have a turbine hall, you have it's coming. You have a meeting place. So, in a way, this is an amazing base to work from. And what I feel and what I see and what I realize is that you have all the ingredients here. You just need to buy them and put them together. And that makes this so exciting.
That's definitely been the next challenge here, to find the cook, as you say. No, but before we open the conversation, I would really like to have some discussion and some questions or comments from the public. But before doing that, I would like just to turn back a little bit to public fundings. I mean, I know that you are an explicit defender of public sector, and public funding now, we are it's a critical issue in a time where the notion of the private and the notion of the public are being shaped. I know this is an old discussion in the crisis of the 70s, which was also indeed the time when Richard Sennett, the sociologist, published his extraordinary text, The Fall of the Public Man, where he somehow compared these, the situation of that time with the situation of the ancient Rome in times of Augustus, where also the notion of the public were being transformed into what he called a formal obligation, similar to the one that Richard Sennett was living in the 70s. So I think that now, more than ever, this formal obligation of the public sector is reshaping the way in which we want to relate ourselves, we want to represent ourselves, we want to project our own image. Even in the way in which we want to rethink the ways and rethink who, when, and under which circumstances some decisions are taken, some political decisions, some financial decisions. So I think that museums have a specific responsibility in doing so, both in engaging this public sector and at the same time giving some sense, some responsibility, some public responsibility as a tool, as an instrument.
Well, I think that, governments have to recognize that culture is an enormous important socio-economical tool, like I've been saying. If you want to invest in your future, you have to invest in culture today. Culture and cultural participation is not only a social-economical tool, but it's also a very important political tool, because after all, it is about participation, it's about feeling represented. So I cannot imagine public governance without that clear investment and clear will and desire and obligation to say culture is incredibly important. If you want to create today a master plan of a new city, what you will have to think about is, in the first place, a mix whereby cultural infrastructure is taking, I would say, almost half of the space. Because there will come a time in 15, 20 years whereby there is no difference anymore between labor time and free time, and that we don't know anymore what is now labor in the classical way and what is an occupation of free time in a new way. And culture is playing an incredibly important role. The second thing is, what we have to absolutely recognize is that we have to create ways to find a balance between private and public investment. And I do believe very much in this private-public investment and partnerships in terms of culture. And this is, it's very hard to imagine how it can work ideally, but if it doesn't work as a mix, then something is going down the drain. And I'm showing this image of Little Britain. And you see how little Britain is in the world. It's almost nothing, right? But Little Britain is becoming smaller and smaller because the government is selling out to private instances. London is being sold out to private developers. And that means we are living on a shrinking island because the current government doesn't find the right balance between the private and the public, doesn't find the right balance between London and the rest of Great Britain, doesn't find the right balance between Great Britain and the rest of the world. Think about the euro crisis and the euro conversations going on, etc., etc. And that is because in Great Britain, for the moment, this whole idea of culture as a public and a common good is threatened to be lost. And God thank, there are museum directors like Nick Serota and like Neil McGregor of the British Museum, who now try to find new cooperations with private institutions which are as private as The Guardian. I mean, The Guardian is for the moment a tool which is looking to the future because, as you know, The Guardian online is getting much bigger than The Guardian in hard print. The Guardian has moved its operations, online operations, from Great Britain to the East Coast in New York, also because of advertisements. But in return, they invest in community hubs in London, in King's Cross, where people, the readers, can come and go and discuss things, and they can exchange things, and they do also exchange with the British Library and with the British Museum and with TATE. And the spaces they are building are called homes for big ideas, so museums. So in a way we are finding these private connections with communities, which are private communities like The Guardian, but we're trying to reconnect with other instances. And I can see that might be a possibility here as well.
Right. Well, I want to give time now to open mic. Please feel free to make some comments or to ask something. We have a great opportunity to have here in the island Chris, who has been also very engaged with the process, the cultural process, in his first visit in the island. So I would really like to have this cross-conversation, at least a couple of questions. We have time enough.
I think the first question should be, what kind of Spanish artists do you show in TATE Modern, no? The reason I'm asking you to ask me that is very simple. We are showing in September, we do an exhibition, it's called The World Goes Pop, which is an alternative story of pop art in the world. And we are showing in that exhibition several Spanish artists. And I'm going to mention to you those artists, they basically, most of them are women artists from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. We discovered them, we explored their work, and they're going all to be shown in that alternative version of pop art, which is showing artists from Holland, but also artists from Germany, artists from Portugal, from Spain, from Greece, from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Brazil, name it. And the following artists of Spain we have selected, and I just want to know who of you know them. Do you know the woman, a woman artist who is now 75, Mari Jorda? Mari Jorda. Nobody knows. Very good. Okay. Anybody knows Eulalia Grau? Very good. Isabel Oliver? No. Okay. Angela Garcia? No. Okay. Garcia. Angela Garcia? No. Wow. See? TATE Modern makes an exhibition going to teach the Spanish public this incredible strong woman artist of the 50s, 60s and the 70s, and all the collectors will jump on it, okay? That's how it works. Yes, so that's what we know. We are doing a lot of Spanish artists. We have, of course, we had Dalí and film, but also Juan Muñoz. We do a lot of Spanish film. I did a series on Pere Portabella, on Alberto Serra, very important. And this is going to be our Spanish September. And the reason I'm doing this, it's a little provocative, I know, but when we spoke to Spanish museum directors, nobody knew these women artists. Nobody. And so now talking about collections, so we decided to buy them, because there is no market yet. So it will become way too expensive for Spanish museums to buy them, because we discovered them. Too bad. Questions which Google cannot answer.
We have a question.
You have to be fast, okay? Come on.
Hola. Well, I prefer to speak in Spanish and you translate.
Yes.
Hay un aspecto de la TATE que no ha tocado y que sé que se hace.
There's something in TATE that you haven't mentioned and he knows that it's taking place.
Tengo un amigo catalán que trabaja allí y es recoger grupos, hacer grupos con mujeres marginadas, con chicos maltratados en escuela, con sudafricanos.
It is gathering group of people who are marginalized, women who do not work or are unemployed or immigrants or
están trabajando dentro del museo con un artista.
That are working within the museum with an artist.
Es una cosa casi desconocida también en la península este trabajo.
There's something very little people know that's taking place at TATE.
No se trata de hacer un dibujo, trabajar con acuarela, sino a partir de las necesidades. A veces construyen casas con papel o con cartón, hacen como viajes espaciales.
It's not about painting or drawing, but they do their needs, the needs of
And the question is if we do that in TATE.
No, he knows that you do that in TATE, and these are that is very little known. That
we work a lot with communities and partnerships, but also we did the Silent University, and the Silent University was inviting people who have very strange jobs in London, who come from Afghanistan, from Iran, from Africa, who used to be university professors and now have to drive cabs. And what we did was to invite these professionals to come and teach people of their community. So we had an Afghani cab driver to come and teach about bioengineering. We had an amazing South African specialist on AIDS who is now working in a little school in London because he doesn't have work to teach about AIDS in TATE, and we call it the Silent University. So we are working a lot with community groups as well. And that's the reason why I showed you the one image of the Doris Salcedo protest with, citizens for minimum wage. These are also people who create work in TATE. We don't consider them as artists. I don't believe in boys saying, jederman ist ein Künstler, everybody is an artist. Not everybody is an artist, absolutely not. And we don't want to be all artists, my God. Then we have the same problem as with the selfies, All clowns. I mean, God dang, there are good artists and bad artists, and we don't have to be all artists. But, it's very important to involve people in all these different activities, and TATE Exchange, this new level, is going to do a lot of all of this. That's absolutely very crucial for us, very crucial.
Yo pienso que es una forma que tendría que desarrollarse porque en lugares en Brasil, en Argentina se está haciendo y es una forma de lúdica, de integración con gente y donde la obra de arte no tiene importancia, sino el acercamiento, el proceso y el acercamiento de esta gente al museo.
And we are also working a lot with, we are not only working a lot with unrecognized, undiscovered Spanish strong woman artists,
pop artists.
We are working a lot with local young British artists who do activities in TATE Modern. I mean, with TATE Britain, TATE Liverpool, TATE St. Ives, because we have a group, I think we cover many of British local artists who are not only invited to show their work, but also to curate exhibitions and to actively participate. For instance, the councils of TATEs, 1/3 of the seats in the councils, in the boards, is taken on by artists. And that's incredibly important. Because, I started with that one image about the big museum building boom, you remember, in Art News, and then I showed the image of The Economist saying the museum is a temple of delight. The new image I should show right now, which is the future, is besides the building, besides this temple of delight, the public, now we have to think about how to get organized. How can we organize museums in a different way? What is the role of the director? What is the role of the curator? What is the role of the politician? Let's think about a museum also as an alternative organization, which could be fantastic. And we are now working on that in TATE Modern, and not only we. There are many museums, especially in Germany, who are rethinking how do we think about leadership and culture. Is it about horizontal leadership? Is it about vertical leadership? Is it about project management? We can do many, many, many things. And if we don't do them, the corporations are doing them, because, you know, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Googles and all these people, they're already now exploring different forms of working together. And that's something we have to learn.
Yes, one question.
Buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias por tan inspiradora conversación.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
Dos ideas me gustaría recalcar de lo que ha dicho. En primer lugar, en una de las imágenes, una de las razones fundamentales por las que el público va a los museos es para adquirir conocimiento.
She wants to point two things. One of the things that you said previously, the main purpose, the main motivation of public is to acquire knowledge at museums.
Más que la experiencia estética.
More than the aesthetic experience.
That's what we found out.
En el vídeo también comentaba usted que es un espacio para crear ideas.
In the video you showed also that TATE is a machine for producing ideas, not only for receiving them.
Yes.
Es realmente impactante para mí. Soy profesora de universidad.
She's a local professor at university here, and
ese era el espacio de la universidad.
And she originally was taught that was the space, the traditional space for university, not for museums. So she's shocked that it's working like this.
No, I mean, positively shocked or
positivamente encantada o no?
Claro que sí. Yeah. Es la universidad la que está en crisis probablemente y es realmente inspirador.
Probably is university the one who is in crisis. And it has been very inspiring to know that other institutions are taking part in this process of transforming the ways in which we are mediating.
Es realmente contradictorio. La gente va a la universidad a buscar un título para conseguir empleo y vamos al museo a adquirir conocimiento y nuevas ideas. Es realmente...
Yeah, it's quite paradoxical now. People go to university just for the degree, for the title, and the real knowledge is taking place at museums.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy you say that, because I'm reading quite a lot of these dissertations of universities, and you know, I don't think that people learn so much anymore. They want to get a degree. But what you bring up is quite important, because I forgot to mention in the connection with The Guardian and the British Library and the British Museum, I forgot, and King's Cross and whatever, St. Pancras, one very important partner of the KQ and also of TATE Exchange is the University of London and the London School of Economics. So universities are also working and being part of this new KQ, this knowledge quarter, which is incredibly important. But that brings me back to the beginning that I said when I arrived with Roc here, to see, it was so incredibly pleasant and really fulfilling to see the students, and old and young, here sitting in the library. And for me, the most exciting view of the Centre Pompidou is not the tourist queuing to see Léger or Matisse, but to see thousands of young people waiting to go into the library. So, and you know that the first museum ever in Alexandria started with a library. The library was the nucleus of the museum, because this whole idea of wisdom. So we just have to, you know, exploit and explore further what we can do with this place to bring this all together.
Thank you. Yes, two questions, one here. You.
Yeah. Well, you have talked about the potential of the island, or the potential of the city, about culture. But sometimes it's not the same if somebody from the island say that if you come here from the TATE and you say that. So the impact of that is completely different. So I was asking, would you be, I don't know, I've been I just arrived from Malaga, and in Malaga we have the Conversación, we have the Hermitage, Isla. I would like to know what do you think about that, about the idea of museums
franchised
set up in another city, and in order to awake the mind of politicians here, the TATE will be ready, will be able to work with the TEA, with some type of Isidro, to create any kind of program, any kind of project to demonstrate that here it's possible to have a potential in culture.
I understood the first question, but the second question I didn't get, really.
I mean, the second question is, will be the TATE ready to work with TEA or with the island in order to create any kind of program or any kind of activity to show our condition, to show our using potential, that we have a really cultural potential in life?
You feel the room is like getting nervous, no? I can feel it. I can
Which is going to be the answer.
So my answer is very brief. I'm against every form of franchising. I think it's ridiculous. It's a form of colonization. It's a form of belittling. You don't need the Centre Pompidou here. You don't need TATE here. We need you in London. And the reason I'm saying this, we can learn so much from each other. But what you have to learn to do is to make cooperations. And it would be so sad not to use here, because of your ping pong with Latin America in the past 200 years, would be so sad not to go out to Valencia, to Ivan, not to go out to Magba, not to go out to Reina Sofia and saying, we would like to make an exhibition with your holdings. Now I know also that the transportation from works from Madrid or Barcelona or wherever is as costful to Tenerife than from London to Tenerife. Probably it's cheaper to come from London to Tenerife than Madrid because of whatever the empresas and all the money which is, hanging somewhere. But it's very important that you cook for yourself. It's incredibly important. I mean, it would be so utterly wrong that TATE is coming to show here how it works. It is not working that way because we don't know how it works here. We really don't know. And it's incredibly important to create something for yourself, by yourself, instead of importing all this. And you know what? The Pompidou, etc. in Malaga is not a success. It's not a success, it's just blah, blah, blah. Come on. I mean, that's the reason why we hire public relations people to tell a story which is not true.
Yes, we had a question before there. You? Okay. Well, and then there's another one here, just to know the order. Perdón, debajo hay alguien más, por aquí había, ¿verdad? Que acaba de levantar la mano.
¿Se oye? Ahul Felagüe. Si Nelson, el almirante Nelson, hubiese conseguido su objetivo, es posible que yo hablase con usted en inglés. O el público aquí asistente estuviésemos hablando todos en inglés. Bueno, usted sabe perfectamente que a lo largo de la historia los imperios han utilizado entre ellos la actividad artística del hombre para imponer sus ideas. Y hay muchos ejemplos a lo largo de la historia.
Para ir traduciéndolo. Perdón, para ir traduciéndolo poco a poco.
Perdón.
Vale. You know that empires traditionally have used culture to impose their own image. Empires have used culture and artistic production to...
Who has
Empires.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
A mí yo me emociono cuando veo que en los museos, cuando ponen el día del museo o la entrada libre, muchas familias entran gratis al museo o a la galería de arte o a los museos de arte moderno.
It's very happy to know that some days some museums are free for access for people to come and they don't have to pay any tickets.
Me entristece al revés, cuando los museos ponen los días de pago y cuando entras al museo prácticamente está vacío.
And it's sad when you have to pay to access and to use culture.
Hizo varias referencias a Santa Cruz de Tenerife, a Canarias en general. Estamos viviendo una crisis muy brutal en Canarias.
You made some reference to the situation of the Canaries and the situation of the island. We're living a very deep crisis here on the island.
Somos los primeros en muchas cosas.
We're the first one in many things.
Fracaso escolar, obesidad infantil, etcétera, etcétera.
Health, students that stop studying at school at a very young age. So sadly, these are something that also happens here in the island.
Ojalá esas necesidades estuvieran cubiertas para que se invirtiera en espacios como este y en otros espacios.
But hopefully we could regulate the situation of education and health, so there's also money to invest in culture.
Le hago las dos preguntas ahora, cortas. Una, ¿por qué en la actualidad los países siguen utilizando a los museos y los centros de arte como propaganda ideológica, cualquiera que sea el país de ejemplo? Y hay muchos.
So first question, why some countries use the cultural diplomacy to project their own image?
Y la segunda pregunta, desde su punto de vista, ¿por qué los centros públicos, centros de arte moderno y centros tradicionales como museos de bellas artes, por qué esos espacios no son gratuitos cuando están financiados con dinero y fondos públicos pagados por todos los ciudadanos? Muchas gracias, muy amable.
And from your viewpoint, why do you think that even those cultural infrastructures that are already funded by public funds are not free? So people that already have paid through taxes have to double pay. Thank you very much.
The second question is very easy. TATE is an advocate of free entrance. We only charge for exhibitions, and you don't have to pay for using the premises of TATE, the infrastructure, and coming to see the collections. And I know that there is also a discussion in Berlin, in Germany, and elsewhere in Germany to make museums free. And I think that's very, very important, to find also the right balance there. And the first question is a question of soft power. I mean, some nations, governments, they recognize suddenly that with culture that you can gain soft power. But often that soft power is based on something else. The reason why France invested in the Louvre in Abu Dhabi is based on a deal between the French airplane industry and the Gulf and the industry of airplanes in the Gulf, military industry in the Gulf. So in return for a weapon deal, there was this deal of the Louvre. So sometimes we see culture as a kind of flagship of good things and positive things, and behind it is sometimes just, you know, a mandate, a political mandate. And culture is used still as soft power, absolutely. And maybe that's also good that, you know, culture is a form of soft power. But it is a form of representation, absolutely.
Well, one last question that we had there previously, because I think I am keeping in mind the great labor that Jorge Soriano is doing within the cabin. He's alone translating both of us, and we are now an hour and a half doing this, and I know this is very exhausting. So one last question, and I think we can leave the conversation.
There is another question over there.
Yeah, okay. Two more questions. Sorry, Jorge.
Volviendo a lo que antes dijo mi amigo Pablo, sobre que ansiamos tener aquí lo que tú mencionabas de Málaga, que tienen, bueno, unos tentáculos y de alguna manera se quieren vincular a los grandes museos europeos. Antes comentaba mi amigo Pablo que las provincias españolas como Málaga, o lo que antes comentamos sobre Tenerife, ansiamos tener por lo menos una aproximación a lo que vemos en los grandes museos de Londres o de Madrid. A mí me pasa, por ejemplo, cuando vas a Londres.
As he was saying before, some peripheral cities also wishes to have a cultural representation.
La realidad es que cuando vas a Londres y vas 3 días, sales con ansiedad de Londres porque no te ha dado tiempo de ver los 10, 15 o 20 grandísimos museos que allí hay.
In fact, when we go to main cities like London, we get anxious because we don't have time to enjoy all these wonderful museums that we don't have in our own countries, in our own cities.
Cuando uno va a Madrid pasa exactamente lo mismo. Lo que quiero decir es que se han convertido las grandes capitales en sumideros de la cultura y han centralizado los grandes museos de una manera que en las ciudades de segundo nivel o provincias como Santa Cruz de Tenerife son incapaces de emular ni siquiera en una mínima parte lo que ansiamos y lo que vemos en las grandes capitales.
So there's a huge difference between what's going on in main capitals and in peripheral cities where we have this tension, and when we travel we don't have time to
Evidentemente en Londres las grandes inversiones de patrocinadores y demás pues se ceban y por supuesto apuestan a caballos ganadores como el Tate y otros grandes museos.
And that's why in main cities private investors usually contribute to culture. It's easier because they see results and
es viable que Málaga, Santa Cruz de Tenerife pues promuevan unos mínimos y unos decentes museos o centros culturales. La pregunta es ¿cómo se soluciona eso?
¿Cómo se soluciona el que
¿Cómo se compensa de que no se centralice tanto la cultura en
How can we balance this extremely centralized cultural production that's taking place in main cities and with this neutral, soft cultural movement that takes place in the periphery?
In the periphery, it's already taking place. I mean, if I see what's going on right now in Great Britain, I see that Manchester and Sheffield and Edinburgh, because of local councils investing in culture, especially Manchester is a very good example. Manchester knew that BBC is looking for cheaper working places, but also banks, Owen Merrill's, the Bank of America, has to go away from London because London is becoming too expensive. And Manchester is saying, how can we make our city more attractive to attractive companies to come here? So already in countries like Great Britain, there is a kind of decentralization taking place. But the big cities, New York, London, Berlin, suddenly, they will always be main cultural hubs. But I see slowly that, second cities are also starting to recognize the importance of cultural infrastructure. And I think the secret is tourist tax. I would ask so much taxes to the tourists. All these people coming from Manchester and Bristol. First of all, if you don't speak Spanish, you pay double tax. And all the tax has to go in cultural infrastructure. I would really like tourist tax tourists. They come anyway, because the weather is going so bad in Northern Europe. Let them pay. You're not going to get them out of their hotels. They don't want to kick their ass. So let them pay. That's what I would do. So,
our final question here.
And then I think you should ask Josefa.
The microphone, please. Okay.
Buenas tardes. ¿Se oye?
Yes.
Sí. Ha insistido usted en la necesidad e incluso la obligación de los gobiernos, incluso de ya traspolado a instituciones privadas, de invertir en cultura, y concretamente de invertir en el funcionamiento de los museos.
You have been talking about the public responsibility of governments to invest in museums.
Yes, to invest in cultural infrastructure.
¿Podría darnos algún dato sobre con qué presupuesto trabaja anualmente la TATE 2014 o el presupuesto que tiene para el 2015?
Can you give us an example of which is the general budget of TATE annually, the one you manage?
I'm really happy you asked that.
Y, por favor, y si sabría, ya que veo que ha tenido bastante información en su visita a Tenerife, si, por ejemplo, domina algunas cifras de presupuestos culturales, por ejemplo, el presupuesto que tiene este museo para el 2015. Muchas gracias.
And if you would, ¿le preguntas por el presupuesto que ya tiene o por el que cree que debería tener para que funcione esto?
Si la pregunta pues es más amplia. Si sabe cuál es el actual y si le parece bien o qué sugerencia.
And also if you know which is our current budget in the museums and which, per your experience, which should be the appropriate one to run a museum like this.
I know that the TANKE has to work with 8,000 euros on an annual basis. I know also that this museum is working with around 300,000 euro. So you see, I did my homework. TATE, and that's the reason why I'm saying, I mean, this is not serious. You cannot do it like that, okay? TATE Britain, TATE Liverpool, TATE St. Ives, TATE Modern, plus our regional partners in Little Britain. We have a total budget of 87 million, of which 25 million is coming from the government. When I started to work as director of TATE Modern, we still got 33 million, which is 6 years ago. So in 6 years, we got cut with about 8 million. And I'm thinking with the next spending review, next November, that we get again less money. So we are acquiring most of the money ourselves, through donors, through catering, through merchandising, through all of this. And I can tell you one thing, only big exhibitions in TATE Modern, like Matisse, they make money. All the other exhibitions is at the best break even. So we live of all these visitors coming to see the collections for free. And of course, when we are lucky, we can make a Matisse exhibition, but to make a Matisse exhibition is very, very expensive. All the other exhibitions is break even or a loss, okay? Which is incredibly important. So we have created a machine, which is a mixed kind of business, where we have catering, enterprise, where we have a lot of private donors. But already we are very fragile, because since the crash on the Chinese stock market, a lot of our private donors, private collectors, who use London as a kind of second Dubai, they already announced again this afternoon on my BlackBerry phone, like, I have to stop giving, because they are, you know, they are involved in all this financial business. So in a way, we have to tell the government, we need more money from the government, because the money is, I mean, it's too fragile a business, and we are so important for Little Britain to make it bigger. That's why I show you this image again. You know that Britain is not much bigger than the Canary Islands. Did you ever think about that?
At least an extension.
Just think about it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your assistance today, and I have to very personally acknowledge Craig's